Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. And today we're going to be talking to Mr. Rohan Sathe about the topic of data loss prevention, or DLP. Rohan is currently the CTO and co-founder of Nightfall and has previously worked as one of the founding engineers of Uber Eats. Rohan, how are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, my pleasure. My pleasure. Whereabouts are you located?
Based in San Francisco, grew up in the Bay Area, and spent about 8 years plus here in San Francisco after school.
Nice. I'm just up the coast from you. Usually, I'm up in the Seattle Bellevue area. Right now, I'm one time zone to the right over in Arizona for weather, because it's just this time of the year in Seattle. I mean, they're just getting hit really, really hard. How are things in the Bay Area?
It's awesome. The San Francisco doesn't get as cold as the South Bay does, where I grew up, and so feeling pretty good.
Excellent. Well, hey, can you maybe, to set the stage, talk a little bit about data loss prevention, or DLP, and explain why you feel that it's so important?
Yeah, so data loss prevention, the crux of sort of the problem that security professionals are trying to solve there is really to understand what sensitive data they store in the applications that they're using, or that their employees are using, and then classifying sort of what is sensitive about the data that exists in those systems, and then potentially preventing data breaches from occurring from those underlying applications. And so the approaches there are to understand if there's sort of accidental exposure of sensitive data in any of the underlying applications, or if a third party, malicious third parties, is in the process of actually exfiltrating data.
Okay, can you walk us through like a real life example?
Yeah, traditionally, a common DLP sort of use case would be if you have laptops that employees are using. You want to monitor those for any exfiltration of data. DLP system would be monitoring any egress coming out of the system, like through a USB port or through the network. They'd be scanning for different types of sensitive data, say credit card numbers, and then they would notify security teams if they noticed any suspicious behavior.
Excellent. Okay, well, as I mentioned in our short conversation before we started recording here, there are obviously a lot of different DLP solutions on the market right now. And for example, obviously Microsoft in their O365 even has DLP tools built in, right, that can detect, for example, credit card information or social security numbers. They can flag that, and you can set policies so you can see, force encrypt, or if they're sending the document to somebody internally, maybe enact one set of policies, externally another set of policies. What angle is Nightfall taking that is different from all the rest?
Yeah, great question. It's probably important to separate kind of the incumbent DLP market from the emerging DLP market. So traditionally, as I mentioned, the vendors in the DLP space had been focused on endpoints, so laptops of employees or servers in a data center. The threat vector has now started to shift towards cloud applications that are being used internally at enterprises. And so the incumbent players still play a part in protecting those underlying applications, but given sort of the new threat vector, there's been a category of companies that have emerged that are focused on protecting these cloud applications. So those would be, SaaS your classic SaaS applications like Slack or Google Drive, GitHub, as well as data infrastructure products on any IaaS ecosystem players like AWS or Azure or GCP. So that's kind of been sort of one of the main shifts. And the second has been sort of the focus on how data classification happens. Traditionally, the approach for identifying information was rules-based. So, regular expressions, pattern-based matching. The advancements in NLP specifically have allowed us to be a little bit more advanced in how we approach the data classification problem.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, a great example would be identifying names. So in the past, if you wanted to create a rule for that, the approach would maybe be to create a dictionary of all possible names that you could think of, right? And
Mm-hmm.
obviously that's pretty brittle and hard to update. And so the new approaches in the NLP sort of ecosystem have been focused on named entity recognition. So the idea there is to understand sort of the context of a sentence and then extract pronouns from that. And that is a better sort of approximation towards names rather than, something that would be rules based.
And then, so is this a technology in terms of the NLP? Is this something that you're developing, or is this something that you kind of add on to your solution? Because I mean, you're looking at it kind of a couple different subject matter expertise requirements there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely a little bit of research that needs to happen as we build sort of any of the underlying data classification models that we build. Particularly if we're doing something in the healthcare domain, then of course we have to understand sort of the compliance there and the requirements for what we're classifying. But ultimately, yes, we are sort of building all these algorithms and training them with data that we can find that is publicly available, or leveraging some of the data in our ecosystem through usage of our product.
Well, that actually brings up a really good point. Are you able to craft, industry specific solutions? And then if you can do that, how about company specific solutions?
Yeah, so at the moment, we try to keep it pretty general, which means that yes, we can build things that are industry specific. So as an example, for a lot of our healthcare customers, they care about similar things. So specifically in HIPAA, as they're looking to get compliant with something like HIPAA, there's a data security control in HIPAA that says, you have to protect 19 classes of sensitive data, and they've identified exactly what those classes are. And so we build models for things like social security numbers, medical record numbers, ICD-9 codes, things like that. And those things will generalize really well to any of the healthcare customers that we go after. And then there's segments that are similar and have an analogous sort of compliance and security related DLP uses. So, in fintech, education, consumer tech, and the list kind of goes on. And then rarely the customer has sort of something very specific that they want to look for. Today, the platform supports them just building a rule or heuristic to accomplish that. And then we can sort of build a custom detector for them. In the future, what we do want to build is the ability for a customer to send us labeled data, and we could train a machine learning model for them automatically.
Okay. So what would be the typical, deployment process with your solution?
Yeah, so if we just talk about a classic use case of ours, healthcare company looking to be HIPAA compliant on some of the applications that their employees are using. So let's take Slack, for example. The customer would come to us and say, hey, I want to make sure that PHI, protected health information, stays out of Slack. And so the deployment sort of modality for us is very straightforward. And I think that's the value prop that our customers enjoy as well. But the idea is the customer will give us authentication into Slack. So this is completely API driven. There are no agents sort of involved in this process where we're shipping any of our customers' software. This is all running on our cloud infrastructure. So they would click a couple of buttons as a Slack admin that would authenticate us into their Slack instance. And then we would be scanning any net new data that's added to Slack on a continuous basis. So as employees are collaborating and sending messages and channels or DMs and files, we'll be scanning those for the types of sensitive data that they're looking for.
And if you spot some sensitive data, I'm assuming that you've already set up some policies. You've consulted with the customer and said, in this type of situation, we want to enact this type of policy. And then you set that up obviously before you flip the switch and go live.
Yeah, exactly. So we have playbooks that are pretty classic for healthcare customers, but our CS teams will work pretty closely with the customers during the onboarding process to set up these policies and make sure we're looking for the things that they're interested in. And then one piece of this is, sure, we can surface all these problems for you, but how can we actually automate solutions and remediations to those problems? And so in the product, there's an automated way to take action. So for example, on Slack, we can do things like, of course, notifying the security teams, but also deleting the underlying content from the system automatically, or redacting the content, or quarantining the content. So those are the types of remediative actions that we support.
Okay, so you're not actually flagging something to the user themselves and saying, "Hey, by the way, could be sensitive information. You may want to not share it, or you may want to encrypt it, depending on what they're doing with it, etc."
Oh no, that's a great point. We do the end user notifications as well, so we can automatically send the end user a notification, coaching them about the policy that company might have about sharing sensitive data, and coaching them not to do that if Slack isn't the appropriate medium.
Okay, let me ask you. Maybe we can back up a little bit. Tell me a little bit how you got started as a co-founder of Nightfall.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I was actually in consumer tech before sort of this adventure in security. So had made my way to Uber from a company, from a consumer mobile voice over IP startup. And part of the reason was because they wanted to use some of the technology that we had built to replace the voice APIs that they were using, where drivers and riders could communicate with each other. And so was brought over to Uber. I think what excited me there specifically was that I would be able to basically start a sub business unit inside of Uber and leverage kind of the core technology that we had already built there. And so was going to be able to sort of exercise these entrepreneurship chops that I wanted to do in sort of a lower risk,
Well-funded environment. Yeah.
Exactly. And so fortunately was able to work on sort of core logistics software that we had built, which previously was really only designed to support a rides business. And sort of the insight that we had was, this technology could actually be used to just deliver anything. So we were delivering people from place to place, and we decided that, hey, why can't we just deliver packages or food or anything really from point to point? And so we sort of abstracted this logistics platform to support more of these types of use cases, and then we got product buy-in to start Uber Eats. So myself and a handful of folks on the engineering side, started Uber Eats, launched that to our first marketplace, and successfully kind of scaled the business to global sort of footprint. I think now Eats even does more than rides in terms of gross bookings. It's a pretty phenomenal business. And
I could just tell you a quick side note there. I lived in Japan a total of 6 years, but I went back from 2019 to 2020, and it's so funny because you just see any students, anybody that has a bicycle, whenever they had some free time, and all you need to do is download the app, sign up, and they'd get, it's just part-time work. And this is something just 2 years prior, you never saw it. And then the whole ecosystem just shifted, right? It's pretty amazing. And that's Japan. And Japan's usually kind of slow on the uptake for, these types of services, but no, hugely popular there.
Totally. Yeah. It's a great way to make some side money, especially earlier in your career. And I think, I think more importantly for me, we scaled the engineering team there to over 170. I happen to be leading a team focused on, our pricing initiatives and leveraging ML to improve our unit economics. But just in being part of the Eats engineering org, started to observe sort of pain points that we were having regarding data security. And so primarily, I think, one, we wanted to be a lot more proactive about how we thought about data security and data stewardship. And secondly, consumer compliance like GDPR and CCPA was coming around the corner. And so, we needed to act pretty quickly and get compliant with that. And so we started to think about, some of the similar challenges that we solve now at Nightfall for enterprises, mainly around, what types of sensitive data are we really storing and accessing? Where is that sensitive data going across all the applications that we're using internally? And then ultimately, how do we protect that data for security sort of reasons, or just to be compliant with things like GDPR? And so started to survey the market and see, what does the incumbency sort of look like? Didn't find much that was modern in terms of what it integrated with. So we of course found sort of the classic DLPs that were focused on, laptops and servers and things like that. And then the approaches that we saw were pretty noisy. So we saw mostly pattern-based and regular expression-based sort of data classification approaches. And at Uber, we were processing petabytes of data across all of our applications. And finally, we didn't find anything that would really help us automate or take action sort of without us having to manually do that. And so, that insight basically led me to feel that there was a gap in the market. And so decided to sort of explore that further. As I mentioned, was always interested in entrepreneurship. Felt like at that point, it was the right time to kind of make a move and explore the idea further. And partnered with Isaac, my co-founder, who was in venture capital investing in security companies at a firm called Venrock. We're actually childhood friends. We grew up together in the South Bay area. And stars kind of aligned. Obviously his background is a little bit more on the go-to-market side, just being inventor, and mine on the engineering and product side at Uber. And so we spent about 6 months really just diligencing the idea, talking to CISOs, compliance folks, security engineers, just understanding kind of what their challenges were around data security, and understanding sort of what tools they were using, how much they would pay for different types of software. And really through those conversations emerged some interesting sort of early pilots. We figured out sort of our beachhead in terms of how we would go after the market, and the rest is kind of history.
Well, and tell us a little bit about your progress since launch.
Yeah, so we've raised 2 rounds of financing thus far. So we did a seed round pretty early on, and then did a Series A shortly after. So raised about, I think, 20 million in total of capital from Bain Capital and Venrock, where Isaac used to work. About 50 employees, have hundreds of customers at this point, and continue to grow.
How are you acquiring your customers?
Yeah, it's interesting for us. So that, of course, in enterprise, there's sort of the traditional approaches, right, with in building out go-to-market teams. So we have a sales team that does outbound prospecting, and then of course we get inbound through just the marketing efforts that we have, SEO, and some of the standard kind of inbound channels that we market on. And then I think the interesting thing for us is because we build integrations with some of these third parties, we're able to sort of basically market ourselves on their app ecosystem. So like on
Right.
Slack, we have a Slack app in their app store, and we show up as like a Slack DLP app. And then as sort of customers start using the Slack app, Slack notices that, or whichever vendor notices that, and we're able to build a closer relationship with their go-to-market team. So in certain cases, depending on the integration, the go-to-market teams at that underlying company will send us customers.
Makes a lot of sense. I worked for a Microsoft partner for 4 years, and the majority of our business came in through that relationship with Microsoft. It's a huge channel there. Well, let me ask you, how do you keep? I mean, obviously there's like I said, we talked about before, a lot of competition in the market, and you're working on a unique kind of angle. How do you keep abreast of not just what the competition's doing, but how the technology, when you talk about NLP and AI, for example, how do you keep abreast of what's happening in these areas?
Yeah, it's with data science and machine learning, the ecosystem is evolving so fast that it's really about sort of continuing to read papers, and I think the folks that we hire are just interested in sort of cutting edge machine learning techniques as a whole, right? And so that convincing them to read papers and stay up to date is not something that I usually need to do. But totally, I think it ultimately it comes down to just making sure that we're aware of all the research that's happening, both in academic settings and in corporate settings, and then seeing if some of those techniques are relevant to us. So, synthetic data is something that is more of a recent sort of phenomenon, and we've been keeping sort of track of that.
I'm actually not familiar with that. Can you explain what that is?
The idea there is, as you sort of build these labeled data sets, as you're building supervised machine learning models, you want to make sure that you yourself are not incurring sort of this problem of keeping sensitive data yourself, right? And so the synthetic data approach is sort of leveraging machine learning to generate fake data effectively, and then leveraging that as part of training your models. So that way you don't need to store as much sensitive data at all.
Okay, that sounds like I might need to read a paper or two on that. Let me ask you this. Obviously, maybe not every customer or organization you speak to is an ideal fit with your solution. What are some of the qualifying questions that you would ask an organization to determine whether or not it might make sense to adopt your solution?
Yeah, probably a great question for our sales team as they sort of qualify different prospects. But I think, first understanding kind of what challenges they're facing, right? So if we hear sort of data security and we hear some of the classic compliance regimes, then typically the questions continue to go on further. If we hear about certain types of applications that they're interested in securing, then of course that's a good signal too, right? So if they say laptops and servers, and we say, that's not really the focus of ours. We have a complementary solution, an existing or incumbent sort of DLP solution that could be a better fit. And then once we've sort of narrowed down the applications, then it's really about understanding what types of data they're looking to protect, and if that falls in the spectrum of sort of the types of classification algorithms that we build, then typically it's a good fit. I think one of the things that has been interesting is in helping security professionals sort of understand the modalities of deployment. I think if you look at sort of the suite of incumbent tools or even some of the competition, the approach has really been centered around shipping you software and identifying sort of traffic within your network. So installing something on the laptop or on the corporate network itself. We feel like that approach, the time to value for that sort of approach is a lot longer, because you have to make sure that there's no performance implications of running something on somebody's laptop or sniffing network traffic or rerouting that, right? Ours is completely API driven, it's behind the scenes, and so that sort of productivity loss doesn't occur. But the second bit is those approaches, you lose a lot of contextual information when you're trying to process network bytes, whereas we are using sanctioned APIs, and those APIs have very rich information around what we're getting back and what we're expected to get back. And so, from that standpoint, customers have come to us and said, well, can you cover X, Y, and Z application? And we say, the network-based approach maybe is broad in terms of coverage. They don't have to build specific integrations with applications, but they lose a lot of context, and that ultimately results in a lot of noise and potentially productivity loss for your employees. The other thing is your employees may not be using the corporate network or a sanctioned device, right? Like they could be using their own mobile phones in their home Wi-Fi that don't have any agents installed, that don't have any network sort of agents listening to traffic. And so, there's not really a foolproof way these days, unless you have a corporate policy that prohibits that kind of usage, which some of the newer companies definitely don't have.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. What can you tell me about your business or your pricing structure? Because it sounds like it should be quite different from typical, number of devices, et cetera.
Yeah. So interestingly, so that there's kind of two core aspects of our platform. There's the native integrations, so some of the things that I just mentioned, where we natively integrate with those applications and provide an experience around data security in our UI. And the way we price those applications typically is on a per user per month basis. So, the reason we do that is the customer is sort of familiar with paying Slack, let's say X dollars a month per employee, right? And so we're saying, to provide additional data security capabilities on Slack, let's charge you a fraction of that, right? So, just making something up, if Slack costs a company $20, then we'll charge them like $4 or $5 per user per month. And so that will be per integration as well. And then if we're talking about our developer platform, which I haven't mentioned yet, which is really a series of APIs that security engineers or even product engineers can leverage to build data classification into whichever use cases they want. So we've taken sort of this engine that does data classification for the native integrations that we offer and just said, here's a developer API where you can just get access to it and funnel whatever data you want through it. For that, we charge on a usage basis. So, amounts of gigabytes that we run.
Could an application developer say, maybe not as big as Slack, but somebody else out in the market say, hey, you know what, we just want to offer this as part of our bundled service. Why don't we just adopt this and white label, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the use cases that we have there are, covering applications that we don't natively cover. So if a security professional is like, hey, I want you to cover, X application, and I don't see it on the native platform, then, we point them to the developer platform. And then the other use case, which you just described, which I think is really interesting, is the companies themselves, if they have sort of initiative to offer data classification within their product, and that typically helps them move more up market, sell to regulated industries. They can embed data classification technologies into their product, leveraging our APIs, and then they don't have to worry about, building machine learning models and doing all the research,
reading all those papers. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Very cool. Hey, well, let me ask you. So, what's 2022 hold for Nightfall?
Yeah, great question. I think for us, it's really there's the vision for us is data security for any application, and really to solve sort of that any application piece. That developer API is a really strong component to that. So in that sense, I think it's continuing to evolve through the developer experience that occurs when using the platform. And I think that would include sort of adding more functionality and capabilities in terms of features specifically, but also expanding kind of the category of data classification algorithms that we build. So that's certainly sort of one core aspect of the platform. We're continuing to build out sort of sample tutorials around how you would integrate with, let's say a logging provider, right? That's a classic use case that we have where your developers are using, different logging solutions. Sensitive data sort of naturally ends up floating in there, PII, things like that, as they're looking to sort of observe and debug issues that are happening in their own products. And so, building out tutorials that sort of show these types of use cases, leveraging our API, building out more SDKs. We have support for some of the common languages, but of course there are many languages. And then on the native front, it's really about continuing to expand the types of systems that we natively integrate with. So today we've kind of focused more on productivity tools like Slack and Google Drive and GitHub and Atlassian products. What's next for us is really thinking about, of course, the Microsoft ecosystem, but also data infrastructure. So, databases on AWS or Azure, GCP is sort of the next focus area for us.
Sounds like a lot of real estate to cover there,
Yeah.
and it should be a busy year. If any of our listeners want some additional information about Nightfall, where should they go?
Yeah, just https://nightfall.ai, and we have video tutorials as well that folks can take a look at to see how the dev platform works as well.
Awesome. Any parting comments that you'd like to let us know about what you're doing?
I think just in sort of the hopes of companies being a lot more proactive about how they think about data security, right? So we don't have to think about sort of this in a post-processing fashion where it's too late if you're deploying something where you're trying to identify if your data is getting exfiltrated. I mean, at that point, the exfiltration's happening. I think sort of the theme that I'm hoping security professionals and compliance folks end up sort of gravitating towards is just being more proactive about data security and data stewardship as a whole. Ultimately, we as consumers are trusting these enterprises with our data, and we hear about all of these data breaches that occur sort of, it seems like, every day. And I think that really starts with hygiene, and tools like Nightfall can definitely help with that.
Well, let's definitely hope so. Hey, Rohan, I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm super excited about the prospects at Nightfall. I'm sure you're going to do great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Appreciate it.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.